On a cold February evening in 2016, cab driver Kevin Williamson picked up what seemed like an ordinary fare in Sacramento, California. But within minutes, something felt wrong. The teenage girl in the back seat wouldn't make eye contact. The older man beside her answered every question directed at her. Her body language screamed distress, and Kevin, a father of 3 daughters, recognized the signs immediately. Instead of simply completing the ride, he made a decision that would change everything. He called the police. Within hours, investigators would break up a trafficking operation that had been operating across state lines for years. What began as a routine cab ride became the breakthrough that saved multiple lives. Chapter 1. The Ordinary Night That Wasn't. Kevin Williamson had been driving a cab in Sacramento for 15 years. The job had taught him to read people quickly, to assess situations in seconds, and to trust his instincts when something felt wrong. February 3rd, 2016, began as an unremarkable Wednesday evening. Kevin started his shift at 6 o'clock, working his usual rotation through downtown Sacramento. The winter air was cold and damp, the kind of evening that kept most people indoors. By 9:30, Kevin had completed a dozen fares without incident. He was listening to talk radio when the dispatch call came through. The address was a budget motel on the outskirts of the city, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the week and asked few questions. He pulled into the parking lot 7 minutes later. The motel was a 2-story structure with exterior corridors and dim lighting. A flickering neon vacancy sign cast uneven shadows across the asphalt. Kevin parked near the office and waited, his engine idling. A door opened on the second floor. 2 figures emerged. A man in his 40s wearing jeans and a dark jacket, and a teenage girl who appeared no older than 15 or 16. They descended the exterior staircase slowly, the man walking slightly ahead. Kevin watched them approach, and immediately, something registered as off. The girl was dressed inappropriately for the weather. She wore a thin, short dress with bare arms despite the temperature hovering in the low 50s. Her makeup was heavy, applied to make her look older, but it instead highlighted her youth. She carried no purse, no bag, no belongings of any kind. The man gestured for the girl to enter first. She slid into the seat without a word, her gaze fixed downward. The man followed, positioning himself between her and the opposite window. He requested a ride to the airport, mentioning they had a flight to catch, his tone friendly and casual. Kevin glanced into the rearview mirror. The girl sat motionless, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on the floor. There was a tension in her posture, a stillness that went beyond shyness or fatigue. Kevin noted faint discoloration along her wrist, bruising that makeup had tried and failed to fully conceal. When Kevin asked which terminal they needed, the man answered immediately before the girl could respond. She had not moved, had not acknowledged the question at all. Kevin's mind began cataloging details. A man and a teenage girl traveling late at night. No luggage, no coats. The girl dressed in a way that suggested a purpose other than travel. The man's immediate control over the conversation. The visible discomfort in her body language. 3 months earlier, Kevin had attended a training session organized by the Sacramento Police Department in partnership with local taxi drivers. The session focused on recognizing signs of human trafficking. Officers had outlined behaviors to watch for. Individuals traveling with no personal belongings, companions who answer questions on behalf of others, visible fear or submission, clothing inconsistent with weather or stated travel plans, and bruising or signs of physical control. Kevin had paid attention during that training, but never expected to use it. Now, driving north toward the highway, he realized he was watching those exact indicators unfold in real time. He adjusted the rear-view mirror slightly, trying to make eye contact with the girl. She did not look up. Her hands trembled faintly in her lap. The man continued speaking, filling the silence with unnecessary commentary about traffic and flight times. His words were rehearsed, his tone too relaxed for someone supposedly rushing to catch a plane. Kevin noted how the man's body angled toward the girl, subtly blocking her view of the window, preventing her from signaling or seeking help. Kevin's heartbeat quickened. He was a father of 3 daughters, the youngest only 2 years older than the girl in his back seat. Every instinct told him something was deeply wrong. He had a choice to make. He could complete the fare and move on to the next call, or he could act on what he was seeing, risk being wrong, and potentially save someone who desperately needed help. Kevin Williamson chose to act. Chapter 2. The red flags multiply. Kevin merged onto the highway, but deliberately took a longer route, one that would add 10 minutes to the journey. He needed time to observe, time to think, and time to be certain about what he was witnessing. He offered an explanation about the heavy traffic on the main route, and the man accepted the delay without concern. Kevin found this odd. Passengers rushing to catch flights rarely accepted delays so easily. Kevin attempted to engage the girl directly, asking if this was her first time flying from Sacramento. Before she could respond, the man answered for her, claiming they were heading back home to visit family. Kevin tried again, asking where they were headed. Again, the man intercepted, mentioning Nevada and placing his hand on the girl's shoulder. The girl flinched slightly at the contact, a reaction so brief that someone not watching closely might have missed it entirely. Kevin shifted his observation strategy, watching without asking direct questions. The girl's body language told a story her silence could not. Her shoulders were hunched inward, her breathing shallow. She kept her gaze fixed downward, never looking out the window, never glancing at her phone, because she had no phone. She had nothing. For someone supposedly catching a flight, she was traveling impossibly light. The bruising on her wrist became more visible under the passing streetlights. The marks formed a pattern, the kind left by a hand gripping too tightly, by force applied with intention. Kevin's training replayed in his mind. Traffickers often transported victims late at night, moved them frequently to avoid detection, and maintained strict control over their communication and movement. Victims were kept isolated, threatened, and made to feel powerless. They traveled without identification, without belongings, and often without hope. The man continued talking, but his story began to shift. He mentioned the girl was his niece, then corrected himself, calling her a family friend. Then, inexplicably, he referred to her as his daughter. The inconsistencies piled up, each one sharpening Kevin's certainty that something criminal was unfolding in his vehicle. Then came the moment that erased all doubt. Kevin slowed for a red light beneath a bright street lamp. The man turned his head to look out his window, momentarily distracted. In that brief instant, the girl lifted her eyes and looked directly into the rearview mirror. Her gaze met Kevin's, and without making a sound, she mouthed 2 words, "Help me." Kevin's chest tightened. His suspicions were no longer theories. This girl was trapped, and the man beside her was her captor. The light turned green. Kevin accelerated smoothly, keeping his expression neutral, his movements calm. He could not let the man sense that anything had changed. 3 blocks ahead, Kevin spotted a brightly lit gas station. He pulled into the lot, parking near the entrance. When the man asked what was happening, Kevin explained apologetically that his credit card reader was malfunctioning and he needed to process the payment inside manually. The explanation was plausible enough. The man settled back, visibly annoyed but unsuspicious. Kevin stepped out of the cab and walked toward the gas station entrance. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded. Inside, he moved quickly to the counter where a young attendant looked up from his phone. Kevin spoke in a low, urgent voice, requesting an immediate call to emergency services. He explained he had a trafficking victim in his cab. The attendant grabbed the phone without hesitation. Kevin provided his name, cab number, location, and passenger descriptions. The dispatcher confirmed officers were being dispatched with an estimated arrival of 4 minutes. Kevin returned to his vehicle, forcing himself to move at a normal pace. He could see the man checking his watch through the glass, growing impatient. The girl remained motionless. Kevin slid back into his seat, apologized for the delay, and continued driving toward the airport at a measured speed. His phone vibrated once with a text from dispatch confirming police were en route. Kevin exhaled slowly. He had done it. Now he just had to keep driving, keep the man calm, and wait. The girl in the back seat remained silent, but when Kevin glanced at her once more in the mirror, he saw the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes. Chapter 3. The investigation unfolds. Kevin had been driving for less than 3 minutes when flashing lights appeared in his rearview mirror. 2 Sacramento Police Department patrol cars moved into position behind him. Kevin signaled and pulled to the shoulder, 5 minutes from the airport entrance. The man in the back seat stiffened immediately, demanding to know what was happening. Kevin maintained that it was probably just a routine license check. 2 officers approached the vehicle, 1 on each side. Kevin handed over his license and registration without hesitation. The officer examined them briefly, then shifted attention to the back seat passengers, taking in details: the girl's age, her clothing, her body language, the absence of luggage, the man's positioning beside her. The second officer requested identification from both passengers. The man produced a driver's license. The girl had nothing. The man claimed she had left hers at home, his tone growing defensive. When asked about his relationship to the girl, the man hesitated before stating she was his daughter. He provided her name as Sarah Webb after another noticeable pause. Within moments, a third patrol car arrived with a female officer who requested that the girl step out for routine questioning. The officers separated them with practiced efficiency, positioning themselves to prevent visual contact between the 2 passengers. Kevin remained in his cab, watching the scene unfold through his mirrors. The female officer, Detective Ramirez, spoke to the girl in a calm, quiet voice. At first, the girl said nothing, her arms wrapped around herself. But Detective Ramirez was patient, asking gentle questions, offering reassurance, explaining that she was safe now. After nearly 2 minutes of silence, the girl broke down, tears streaming down her face as words spilled out in fractured sentences. She was not Sarah Webb. Her name was Jennifer Santos. She was 15 years old and had been missing from her Sacramento home for 3 weeks. The man was not her father. His name was Marcus, and he had taken her, held her, threatened her family, and moved her between motels across multiple cities. She had been forced into situations she could barely articulate, her voice breaking as she described weeks of captivity and exploitation. Detective Ramirez radioed for additional units, including investigators from the Human Trafficking Task Force. Meanwhile, the man's story continued to shift under questioning. His identification showed Marcus Webb, aged 43, with a residential address in Stockton. When officers asked him to explain the inconsistencies in his account, he demanded a lawyer and refused further questions. Marcus Webb was placed under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and human trafficking. Officers read him his rights as he was handcuffed and placed in a patrol car. Jennifer was wrapped in a blanket and placed in a separate vehicle. She would be taken to a hospital for evaluation and then to a secure location where trained advocates could begin gathering her statement and ensuring her safety. Before leaving, Detective Ramirez approached Kevin's cab, expressing gratitude and confirming that he may have saved the girl's life. Kevin asked if Jennifer would be okay. Ramirez replied that they would do everything possible, but because of Kevin's actions, Jennifer now had a chance. As the patrol cars pulled away, Kevin sat alone in his cab, the weight of the evening settling over him. He had trusted his instincts and set in motion a chain of events that ended with a girl's rescue and a trafficker's arrest. But as investigators would soon discover, this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. Breaking the Operation. Marcus Webb's arrest was not simply the conclusion of Jennifer Santos's rescue. It marked the beginning of something far more significant. Within hours, investigators made a discovery that would transform a single trafficking case into a multi-state operation. Webb's cellular phone contained a trove of incriminating evidence. Forensic analysts worked through the night, extracting encrypted communications, photographs of multiple young girls, location data spanning 3 states, and financial transaction records. What emerged was a portrait of an organized network operating across California, Nevada, and Oregon. The Sacramento Police Department immediately contacted the FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. Federal agents arrived within 12 hours, bringing resources and jurisdiction that allowed coordination across state lines. Webb was a mid-level transporter within a larger criminal enterprise that had been operating undetected for over 3 years. The phone records revealed connections to at least 8 other individuals. There were recruiters who targeted vulnerable teenagers through social media, promising modeling opportunities or romantic relationships. There were enforcers who used threats and violence to maintain control. There were operators who managed logistics, advertising victims online, and collecting payments. The network had generated an estimated $500,000 annually, laundering money through cash-based businesses that left minimal paper trails. Investigators conducted surveillance for 48 hours to map the full scope of the operation. On February 5th, coordinated raids were executed simultaneously across 4 cities. Teams moved into motels, apartments, and private residences in Sacramento, Reno, Portland, and Los Angeles. 7 individuals were arrested. 5 additional victims, ranging in age from 14 to 19, were recovered. Each girl told a similar story: false promises, isolation, threats against their families, and forced exploitation that moved them from city to city to avoid detection. Jennifer Santos was reunited with her mother 2 days after her rescue. The reunion was emotional and complex. Jennifer had endured trauma that would require years of counseling to process. She was placed in a specialized program designed for trafficking survivors, receiving medical care, therapy, and education about her legal rights. The other rescued victims followed similar paths, returning to families or entering trauma-informed foster care programs. Marcus Webb was prosecuted in federal court. The evidence against him was overwhelming. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. His 6 co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 12 to 30 years, depending on their roles and cooperation with investigators. Kevin Williamson received formal commendations from both the Sacramento Police Department and the FBI. More importantly, his actions created a ripple effect that extended far beyond a single night. California legislators passed legislation mandating human trafficking awareness training for all commercial drivers, hotel employees, and transportation workers. Kevin became a spokesperson for these programs, teaching others to recognize the signs he had observed that February evening. Jennifer Santos, after years of recovery, found her voice as an advocate. She began speaking at schools and community centers, sharing her story to educate young people about trafficking tactics. Her message was clear: trafficking does not always look like abduction by strangers. Often, it begins with someone who seems trustworthy, someone who offers friendship or opportunity, someone who gradually takes control until escape feels impossible. The investigation became a landmark case in federal law enforcement. It demonstrated how a single observant individual, willing to act on suspicion, could dismantle an operation that had victimized dozens of young people over multiple years. It also exposed the reality that human trafficking was happening in American cities, on American highways, in plain sight of people who simply did not know what to look for. Kevin Williamson returned to driving his cab after the trials concluded. He continued working the same routes, navigating the same Sacramento streets. But he carried with him the knowledge that attention and action could mean the difference between a girl returning home and a girl disappearing forever. The network Marcus Webb had served was destroyed, but investigators acknowledged that trafficking remained a pervasive crime. New operations would emerge, new traffickers would exploit new victims, and the fight would continue. Yet the case proved something essential. Intervention was possible. Awareness could save lives. And sometimes, an ordinary person on an ordinary night could become the difference between captivity and freedom. Kevin's decision to trust his instincts, to recognize the signs, and to make a single phone call had saved 5 young lives and brought justice to those who had profited from suffering. It was a reminder that heroism does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes, it begins with simply paying attention and choosing to care. Ultra. Kevin Williamson's decision to trust his instincts that February night didn't just save Jennifer Santos. It brought down an entire trafficking operation and rescued multiple victims. His story proves that ordinary people, paying attention and willing to act, can make an extraordinary difference in the fight against human trafficking. The case became a turning point in how law enforcement and civilian communities approach trafficking awareness. Before Kevin's intervention, many drivers and transportation workers received minimal training on recognizing trafficking indicators. The legislation that followed his actions changed that reality across California and eventually influenced policies in other states. Thousands of drivers, hotel staff, and transportation workers now receive mandatory training on the warning signs Kevin observed that night. Victims traveling without belongings, companions who control all communication, inconsistent stories about relationships, visible signs of physical control, and clothing inappropriate for stated travel purposes. Jennifer Sanos' recovery journey was long and difficult, but her willingness to eventually share her story created awareness that likely prevented other young people from falling victim to similar tactics. Her advocacy work highlighted a crucial truth. Traffickers do not fit a single profile, and victims can come from any background. The networks that exploit them operate in plain sight, relying on the assumption that bystanders will not notice, will not question, or will not care enough to intervene. Marcus Webb's network had operated successfully for 3 years precisely because it moved victims frequently, kept them isolated, and exploited locations where transient populations drew little attention. It took one observant cab driver, trained to recognize the signs and willing to act on suspicion, to unravel the entire operation. Kevin's choice that night proved that intervention does not require special authority or training beyond awareness and willingness to trust one's instincts when something feels wrong. The fight against human trafficking continues. New networks emerge, new tactics evolve, and new victims are targeted every day. But cases like Kevin Williamson's remind us that change is possible when ordinary people refuse to look away. Awareness saves lives. Attention disrupts criminal operations. And sometimes, a single phone call made by someone who chose to care can mean the difference between captivity and freedom for multiple people trapped in unimaginable circumstances. If this investigation opened your eyes to the signs of trafficking, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime documentaries that expose the truth and honor those who stand up against injustice.